r/askreddit. Posted by Reddit user wildeyephenix. Serious. Redditors who work at cemeteries and graveyards. What strange and scary stuff have you witnessed? I work at a graveyard, and I just have one thing to say. Plastic. Here in Norway, graves are protected by law for 20 years. But after that, the spots can be, quote-unquote, reused. Usually, a grave is fine to reopen after 20 years. The body is supposed to be decomposed and pretty much gone. But now, back to plastic. Between the 50s and the 80s, it was common here to be buried in plastic to minimize smell and leakage. I'm sure they thought it was a good thing back then, but once we started reusing graves, we realized it was a curse. A lot of bodies are wrapped in plastic, and I myself have been a part of what was supposed to be a burial at a reused site. The body was about 50 or 60 years old, and should be basically gone. But nope, it was not. The plastic wrap covered it and kept the body from decomposing, and basically, it just marinated in its own juices for 50 or 60 years. The smell was awful, and the sight was even worse. I'm sure it's not the kind of story you wanted, but it's honestly one of the most horrific and bizarre things I've ever been a part of. Former funeral director here. My partner and I had gotten back to the funeral home from a house call for a 31-year-old woman who died of cancer. As we were moving her body from the cot to the embalming table, we heard an audible click, and the radio across the room turned on full volume of static. It's one of those old radios where you turn the volume dial until it clicks and turns on. We both looked at each other. He was an extremely religious man, and this event visibly shook him, and he left not long after the incident. I shut the radio off as I typically use my phone to listen to music while embalming. When I'd finished the procedure and was attempting to move her from the embalming table to a dressing table, I heard that click again from the old radio, and it turned on full volume yet again. At that point, I was fairly freaked out and made my exit not long after. My partner and I never spoke of it again, and nothing like that ever occurred to my knowledge, before or after. I used to do some odd jobs at the 12th century graveyard in my hometown. 12th century as in the church and its surrounding graveyard had been in the continuous use for at least that long. When you keep burying bodies in the same small patch of ground for that many centuries, eventually, the soil has to be turned over dozens of times and consists of mainly bone fragments. You can't even plant flowers there without accidentally uncovering some teeth, maybe some finger bones or something. It's nothing but fragmented skeletons all the way down under the thin turf. The soil sort of resembles seaside shell sand, except on closer examination, all the light-colored bits are bone fragments rather than crushed seashells. It's not really scary or unexpected, just a bit eerie until you get used to it. You learn to treat anything recognizable as human remains with respect and just tuck it away out of sight, under the plant or wherever else you were putting there. My issue was always strange people visiting. I worked at the cemetery Jimi Hendrix was buried at, so lots of weed, people hanging around. One time, we found a dead homeless man behind the mausoleum. We actually smelled him first. Another time, getting ready to bury a person, we dug a grave. It was in a section of graveyard that had very old burials, maybe 100+ years, so lots of wooden caskets. My foreman at the time was squaring off a hole with a shovel. Then, he saw a skull looking right at him. He quickly and quietly pushed it farther into the dirt and told us not to say anything. If the office people had found out, it would have been a whole thing, digging it up, trying to figure out who it was, etc. Never saw a ghost, but some of the old timers say they have. Not sure if I believe them. Lots of other stories, but that one stands out. I worked for a county cemetery department years ago. We would just go to all the cemeteries in the county, mow or do basic upkeep. Occasionally people, mainly farmers, would stumble upon some old headstones in a field or a stand of trees, and we would come out and prod the ground with dowel rods to find more headstones and reestablish the cemetery. Soon after I started working there, we got a tip about some headstones a farmer found while clearing out a path through some trees for easier access to his fields. It turned out to be the oldest cemetery in the county, dating back to the 1700s. After investigating some names of the headstones, it got really creepy. The story is that before the cemetery, there was a schoolhouse that stood there. The teachers were a husband and a wife. It's not clear exactly what happened, but the students and the husband and the wife all died in that schoolhouse. The information we found kind of made it sound like an illness of some kind, and they were all quarantined within the school until they all died. The school was then demolished, and the students and husband and wife were all buried right where the school stood. So yeah, I'm sure it's haunted. Do pet cemeteries count? I was maybe about 13 or 14 when our family cat had died. He was a fantastic cat, all black and really green eyes. His name was Panther. He always sat on his favorite perch and always gauged the room. Never loud, never braggadocious. He ended up dying of old age. My parents had him maybe 5 years prior to me being born, so I lost a part of myself when he gone. We buried him in the backyard, and I was upset, but it was fine because I knew that he was no longer hurting, and that wherever he was looking over me, making sure I was safe. It was about a year later after he died. I was in the backyard helping my dad pull weeds or some other bullshit suburban stuff. My dad went inside to take a break and get a couple of waters. I sat there with the hot sun beaming in my face. I decided to take a look at the little makeshift gravestone we made Panther. Immediately, I got a off feeling. Nothing bad, but just different. I took a look up, and in the tree, I saw what looked like a full-grown panther, its green eyes piercing, looking through my soul. It was only a couple seconds, but I swear I stayed there locked eyes with him for what felt like hours. It wasn't until my dad opened up the screen door when I looked back, and when I went to look again, it was gone. I still think about that time, and I still believe that Panther is looking over me, making sure I stay safe. I love you, boy. Not employed, but every once in a while as a stupid teenager, we would get dared to walk through the cemetery. It was usually no big deal, just a lot of oohs and ahs, bullshitting about ghosts and town stories that everybody tells. Every once in a while, someone got the bright idea to spark up a joint and chill out by the headstones. Most times it was fine. Ominous, creepy feel, but nothing too worrisome. One day, it was just me and two of my other buddies. All of a sudden, we heard what sounded like sobbing. It wasn't very loud, extremely faint, like maybe a woman crying into her shoulder or into a pillow or something. We all got really spooked, and we looked around, but there was nobody within miles. There was nobody over the gates. There was just nobody. Needless to say, we were all freaked the fuck out, and we decided to walk our way out. Taking the usual route was about a 2-minute walk from where we were at. In that 2 minutes, the crying never ceased. It never got further. It never got closer. It was just there, consistently. No words spoken. I don't know how I knew this, but I knew she was miserable, and whatever she was crying for meant something dearly to her. When we crossed the threshold, back onto the civilian sidewalk, the crying stopped. We all looked back, still saw nothing, but we felt the presence of whatever was there leave us. After that, we took a long hiatus from our cemetery spark-ups. I was a tombstone caretaker for a cemetery in rural Georgia. Summertime job for a 16-year-old. Nothing crazy, just cleaning off the grime of the elements on the tombstone. Now, just to put a setting, the cemetery included one building that housed bathrooms for the 5 staff members. A small, simple mausoleum, and then, other than that, flat earth with tombstones everywhere. The only surroundings were dense forest in the Georgia country. That being said, due to the eerie surroundings, I was always a bit paranoid. Plus, I watch a lot of scary movies and so on. Yeah, I know. Bad combo. So one night, I was doing my rounds, and I had to go into the small mausoleum. I had some of the richer families in the areas entombed within. I had to go in and make sure that all was neat and clean. Standards had to be upheld for these uppity folks. So I approached, and right off the bat, something was off. The air was pretty damn cold. During the summer in Georgia, that was odd. There was also a light coming from the mausoleum, and as I approached, I heard voices. Maybe laughter? Laughter from a child. A little girl. I thought it was simply younger folks, maybe. I haven't seen anyone enter or leave the cemetery, and the laughter sounded young. However, as I got closer, all the voices and laughter died. Like, almost instantly. I paused. The light, I also noticed, had gone out. I called a lone security officer who does a few rounds on the lot, because I'm not going to go in alone. He comes. We will call him Officer Friendly. When Officer Friendly arrives, we both go inside. We see one of the doors to the entombed remains of a young girl open. Nothing was disturbed within, but it was open, and a doll lay on the stone beneath it. Me and Officer Friendly do a small sweep. It was only 1 floor and 1 room, so it didn't take long. We close the door to the girl's entombment, and we both leave. As we walk away, we get about 30 feet from the mausoleum, and then all of a sudden, boom, voices and laughter again. I jump, and Officer Friendly looks at me, looking pretty shaken, and says, "You hear it too?" We look back, and boom, lights back on, laughter continuing. We don't go back, and just book it. I found out the next morning, the door was open again. This time the doll was on the other side of the mausoleum from where we found it the night before. Easy to say. I resigned the next day. I'm good.